Sometimes we find games that in the majority are received well, but for whatever reason are often forgotten. Here are 10 JRPGs that I consider to be underrated. Starting with Tokyo Xanadu, specifically its enhanced EX Plus version. Tokyo Xanadu is a great game, but it committed one sin in that Neon Falcon were the developers and they place far more importance on Ys and especially Trails. Tokyo Xanadu, as the name suggests, was an extension of the Xanadu sub-series created in 2015 just before Ys 8 and marking 10 years since the last entry in the franchise, that being Xanadu Next. It has not been revisited since. Tokyo Xanadu follows the journey of Ko Tokisaka throughout the fictional Tokyo suburb of Morimiya as he goes to school, works part-time jobs, and hangs some mad air. Soon after, he's drawn into an otherworldly battle involving the Eclipse, a separate space-time from the one he exists in. From here, he meets a bunch of other characters who all come together to close the portals for good. Tokyo Xanadu, as a result of this premise, often gets compared to Persona, and is sometimes labelled as a Persona clone, which is completely off the mark. It doesn't have the self-insert character, its bonding events draw more on the style seen in Cold Steel, and its combat takes on an action-centric style rather than Persona's press-turn approach. Just because the story premise has similar elements with the use of the supernatural doesn't make it a clone, otherwise we might as well say Blue Reflection or any shonen anime with a similar approach is shaped from the Persona mold. Rather, Tokyo Xanadu is a breath of fresh air from the consecutive deluge of Trails and Ys releases that modern Neon Falcon choose to go down nowadays. While it has all the substance of the more praised Falcon titles like decent gameplay, a good story and fantastic soundtrack, Tokyo Xanadu in many ways feels like a more relatable journey to the average player, its modern setting being one key reason. Falcon even saw fit to base some of its areas on the region of Tachikawa where the company's head office is based, giving the game a sense of relatability not seen in the other flagship titles. It also feels like a celebration of Falcon's works in many ways, with references to other releases sprinkled throughout in the form of minigames or just existing in the environment itself. It makes exploration fun, it's a highlight of the journey and adds yet more to the concept of talking to the NPCs, which is so common in the likes of Trails, adding more to the world but also giving it a relatable link that fans can draw on. And it's no wonder that in the present age many are crying out for a sequel to this often overlooked gem of a game. Even Falcon themselves seem to be teasing us if their pre-order bonuses of the Switch version are anything to go by. Next up is another title set in modern day Tokyo, and it's the Tokyo Mirage Sessions FE Encore. Talking about Persona clones, why isn't this labelled as one? High school students come prospective idols going into otherworldly dimensions and protecting the world away from the eye of the public, no less with demons that hang by their side, and it uses an SMT inspired battle system too. See what I mean? This is why I'm not on board with that argument, because Tokyo Mirage Sessions, in particular its FE Encore Enhanced re-release, is so much more than that. It's one of the more unique and refreshing titles I've played in recent years. It follows the journey of Itsuki as he's eventually drawn into a battle against the Mirage, servants of a more sinister power. To do this, he joins an organisation known as Fortuna Entertainment that acts as an idol agency on the surface but takes out the Mirage on the down low, with the employees on their books being the agents who make that happen. As a result, individuals tied to Fortuna pursue their goal of ascending the world of showbiz while also protecting the world. It's a weird premise, but it just works. Tokyo Mirage Sessions was memorable for all the right reasons. While its story isn't anything to highlight, it shines in areas like its combat, characters and music. The music in particular becomes a focus of the game. You're gonna get to see some neat little music videos as the characters become ever more successful, and it acts as a reward in many ways for seeing character arcs through to the end. The combat itself is based around the idea of sessions and will be recognisable to any Megaten fan as skills are drawn directly from that universe. Hit a weakness of an enemy and your teammates join in for chain attacks to take them out quickly. It also ensures that you need to pay attention as well. This game can be quite difficult at points, but it never feels unfair, and if you really want to, Tokyo Mirage Sessions gives you ample opportunity to min-max if you prefer to go down that route. It's humorous, it's colourful, and it's brimming with personality throughout, a fantastic game that doesn't overstay its welcome. Next up is the remaster of the original Nier in Nier Replicant's version bleh. Again, this remaster is fantastic, but its one foil is that it's often compared to the masterpiece of Nier Automata. Now, while I concede that the gameplay isn't as strong, Replicant excels in its characters and story. The likes of Kaine, Emile and Grimoire Weiss are brilliant as a core set of characters, bouncing off each other with both humour and profound moments of plenty. The polarity of Kaine's brash attitude to the more proper yet sarcastic tone of Grimoire Weiss is always a pleasure to witness. But then you start to dig below and realise that these characters are so much deeper than they show on the surface, and Replicant demonstrates that through its stellar world building and storytelling. While it won't be for everyone, Yoko Taro has a tried and tested method of conveying thought-provoking stories which is so often difficult to replicate. Others have tried, but no one can do it as well as him. I love narratives like these that really make you look below the surface, that leave some events to the imagination and makes you, the player, piece it together in your own way, but still giving just enough to make it memorable. Its boss battles are a spectacle, its music is beautiful, and the world matches the ambience the game is going for. Hues of grey and flat colours that reflect the almost melancholic feel of this land. It's a shame that Replicant is often overlooked just because it's not Automata, because I'd argue that both excel in their own unique ways. We move to Fire Emblem now, with Radiant Dawn. Again, just like Replicant, this game is often overlooked because it's compared to Path of Radiance, which is considered one of the best games in the entire franchise, and that comparison becomes ever more prominent because it's set in the same universe. Radiant Dawn was actually my first Fire Emblem game. I was 15 at that point in time, and funnily enough, it was Smash Bros. Brawl that made me eventually pick this up, as Ike was one of my go-to characters. Because of that, I wanted to know where he came from, and after some scouting around, I saw that Path of Radiance was not available to me, mostly because of price, but I could at least try Radiant Dawn, and I was hooked. I didn't play anything else until I finished my playthrough. Whether it was the backdrop of warring kingdoms, the excellent strategic gameplay, or its decent cast of characters, I just could not pull myself away from Radiant Dawn. It was the perfect way to get me into the Fire Emblem franchise, and I haven't looked back since. But despite being well received for the most part, I rarely see this game mentioned among Fire Emblem fans. Some even disregard it because it wasn't as strong as Path of Radiance. Now, while I haven't played the prequel yet, so I can't make the comparison, what I can say is that Radiant Dawn is strong even as a standalone. While the story does eventually move to a more generic approach later on, I still enjoyed it because it was executed well. The narrative was consistently delivered throughout. I'd say the only downside is that the focus eventually moves away from Micaiah and more onto Ike, which is hit or miss for some, but it didn't do nearly enough to sway my positive perception of this wonderful game. Talking about wonderful games, next up is E7. I came out on record and said that this is my second favourite game in the entirety of the franchise, and I still stick by that. It has everything that I feel the E-series excels at: its sense of adventure, its tight yet fast action-based gameplay, banging OST, and brilliant boss battles. I hold the opinion that E7 is not looked on as favourably as other titles for two reasons. Firstly, it admittedly hasn't aged too well aesthetically. The blocky character models are a bit jarring and a far cry from the pre-rendered sprites from the Nepishtim engine titles, which had their own charm. But we don't play Falcom games for graphics, it's all about the substance which E7 is oozing in, which brings us to the second point. It was the first game to utilise the group-based gameplay that would later be refined in the likes of Memories of Celceta, Ys 8 and Ys 9, and some people do not like change. Which sucks, because this gameplay is brilliant. I'd argue that it's better than the iterations seen in Memories of Celceta. It feels much more smooth and is also more balanced around melee and ranged characters. However, E7 really shines in other facets that I place more importance on. Its OST is among my favourites in the series. The opening theme of Innocent Primeval Breaker is a banger of the highest order. A juicy meat-filled Cumberland sausage to just rock your head to for hours on end. Its dungeon design is the best in the series, multiple levels, a good deal of verticality, not too long, decent puzzles, diverse environments, they have it all. And the boss battles, oh my word, these boss battles are a spectacle in of themselves. Enemy models that take up the whole screen at times, often with multiple phases that push you to your limits. I love it. And finally, the characters. Not only does it allow you to play as Dogi, something we haven't seen since this point, I feel that this game has the best antagonist in the entirety of Ys. They were relatable and well developed, with an understandable objective that I dare say would resonate with some. E7 had so many positive highlights that I lament it's often overlooked. It's without doubt one of the best in the series to me. Next up is Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. Crystal Chronicles originally released on the GameCube way back in 2003, and it didn't come west till a year later. Unlike the standard formula seen in mainline entries, this game took on a more make-your-own journey approach. You make your own character, you give them a background, family, and then go off on your journey. It's a dungeon crawler come action RPG where you take a chalice in tow with the goal of taking out the horrors that lurk within and gaining a drop of myrrh. Once you have enough, you take the full chalice back to your home village, and the myrrh acts as a type of fuel for the village's crystal to fend off the malicious miasma for the rest of the year. And the gameplay loop continues like this. During your adventures, you'll also bump into fellow travellers, where every now and then you'll have to make choices that feed into the final outcome. This game is all about the journey. It's not a typical linear affair as you so often see in JRPGs, but it really worked for Crystal Chronicles. You're watching the world weave around your actions, you're feeling tangible effect from your choices, and that's great. But what's really elevated this game for me is its multiplayer. Some of my favourite memories in gaming come from playing Crystal Chronicles with my two friends, hooking up our Game Boy Advances, or SPs in some cases, and just braving the wild with my band of homies. What's better still is that your friends were also part of this world. Your village, for example, may have a blacksmith family that would be yours, but your friends could fill out the rest of it with their own families, giving your home a real sense of relatability and coziness. They would also have their own choices to make, letters would come from their family to see how they were getting on, and it immersed you in this idea that you were travelling together. You were braving diverse and dangerous dungeons that ranged from mushroom-filled forests to literal monster mansions. It was ludicrous at times, but there was just a sense of camaraderie there that I haven't felt since. And even though Square tried to revive the original by bringing it to likes of Switch and mobile devices, they completely butchered the multiplayer components, and as a result, the original still remains the best. I'll never get those moments back, but I'll always remember my time with Crystal Chronicles as some of the best memories I'll have in gaming. Talking about great memories, we move on to Sakana of Rice and Ruin. When you consider that this game was essentially made by two extremely driven developers who literally researched everything related to rice cultivation in order to make it as accurate as possible, I just gain even more respect for it. Sakana is a side-scrolling action-based title where you play the role of a harvest goddess, that being Sakana. She commits a sin against the head honcho of the higher plane and is forced to atone on a demon-infested island below. In order to do this, she has to rid the island of said demons while also learning to coexist with humans she once deemed beneath her. And being a harvest goddess, she does that through the cultivation of rice, which feeds in directly to her progression. Now, this is one of the most beautiful games I've played. Let me get that out of the way first. The character models are charming, the backgrounds are lush, and the colours are vivid. They demand your attention at every moment. It really does feel like you've been thrust into an ancient Japanese legend. And it's not just the artwork that evokes that feeling, the soundtrack is also top grade, utilising traditional Japanese instruments like the koto and shamisen. And the brilliant thing is that these songs are not overbearing, they complement the calm and serene nature that this game permeates. And though combat itself can be a bit finicky at times and stressful too in equal measure due to its day-night cycle, the core of the gameplay is mostly focused on the rice itself. It's extremely relaxing and a nice break from the combat to just sit back and tend to your crop. And yes, I even enjoyed many of the processes that some players may have found monotonous, like tilling the land before planting, threshing and polishing. It really gives you an appreciation for the process as a whole. Even stuff like mixing fertilizer was rewarding in of itself. Learning when to prepare it, the optimum time to spread so that the soil gains all the nutrients, putting rotten food in to boost the parameters, and offsetting this with salt to lower the pesticide rates. It's just delightful the levels of depth on offer here, and it's sad because so much care and love went into it, but I barely see the game mentioned at all. So I'm doing my part. If you want a game that is equally as charming as it is relaxing, then give this one a try. And since we're mentioning relaxing games, next up is Atelier with Lydie and Suelle. This is the final game from the original Mysterious trilogy and the last chronologically among them, even when including the newest release of Atelier Sophie 2. In this game, we join the twin sisters of Lydie and Suelle as they attempt to make their atelier the best in the city. Now, Atelier games are generally not known for their narrative, but I actually consider this to be the best story of the original 3 entries. First of all, it's actually got some emotional moments within it. Lydie and Suelle's story is no notably family focused, leading to a more wholesome journey. It also benefits from continuity. While the game itself is strong in its own right as a standalone narrative, it also functions as a solid epilogue for this sub-series, seeing the return of certain characters, and in typical Atelier fashion, many of the individual arcs end on a positive and uplifting note. But that's not to say the new characters are outshone, far from it. Liddy and Suelle perfectly complement each other as a double act. Combat also takes on the turn-based foundation from the previous games in that 3 members fight on the front line, but it also introduces a back row as well, which allows you to unleash some pretty cool combos, and these combos are mostly spawned through your work in alchemy. And that's where the game really shines, as you would expect. The alchemy on offer here is not only the best in the sub-series, but the best I've experienced so far in the entire franchise. In short, it ironed out the problems from Atelier Theorist like proficiency grinding, doubled down on what made Sophie so satisfying, and then just allowed the player to go wild by introducing the mechanics early on. Most importantly though, it's fun. It never loses its luster from the first minute you start the game. And the real shame here is that once again this game is hardly ever mentioned. Maybe it's because it's the last in the trilogy, so some players were burned out before they got there, or maybe they didn't get to it at all and felt they had seen all they wanted with the first 2 games. And that's a shame, because I do consider this to be the best of the original trilogy and one of the best games in the franchise as a whole. We're not done with Gust though, as we move on now to Blue Reflection's Second Light. Forget just saying it's an underrated game, this is an underrated series. If you're on the lookout for a JRPG focused around a great core of characters, both Blue Reflections will have you sorted. However, I'm going to recommend this sequel from 2021 simply because it took the foundation of the first game and improved on nearly every aspect. And no, you don't need to play the first one to understand this, though you will see some returning characters if you decide to play it in order. There is also an anime called Blue Reflection Ray, which focuses on 2 more characters who appear in Second Light, but once again that too is not required. The game follows Ao Hoshizaki, a sprightly yet admittedly plain girl who quickly finds herself awakening in an isolated school, far away from any sort of civilization. With a group of other students, Ao will spend part of her time exploring heartscapes, which are manifestations of the inner emotions and memories of an individual shaped into a physical world. During the course of your adventure, you'll be traversing a myriad of these, and since they are unique to the individual who birthed it, it lends to a real sense of diversity in the worlds. However, these heartscapes are not free of danger. There are also demons that roam the lands, but these girls are more than capable of looking out for themselves. As reflectors, the group are able to draw on their feelings and memories and manifest them into actual power, which can be used to defend themselves. You'll take control of 3 active members and 1 supporter in a predominantly turn-based system with real-time elements. On top of that, each reflector comes equipped with their own talent tree, allowing you to learn more skills for either combat, crafting, or boosting base skills. And while the aforementioned elements are decent, the real highlight of Second Light is in its characters and beautiful OST. The characters in particular take centre stage, and just like Crystal Chronicles, it's more a case of appreciating the journey rather than the end goal, as a lot of the enjoyment comes from the interactions and chemistry between the girls, how they may be related to each other in the context of their memory loss, and naturally how that feeds into the story overall. For me, this was easily the best part about the experience, and was always a pleasure to partake in. It's a great little game, doesn't overstay its welcome, and for the most part, it's a feel-good adventure with a real calming effect. I will always happily recommend it. And last on the list is a game from my favourite series, and it is Trails in the Sky the Third. Now if you intend to play this game soon, or you're currently progressing through the 2 earlier Sky games, I would skip past this segment because there will be some minor spoilers. You have been warned. The final Sky game shook things up quite significantly. For one thing, we've got a new protagonist in Kevin Graham who has since revealed his identity as a Grohl's Ritter Dominion. On top of that, instead of the exploration of the world inherent in the previous 2 games, we have a linear dungeon crawling aspect of a central hub called the Hermit's Garden, which immediately can be hit or miss for some players. And this is where the point of contention comes. Because it plays differently, I've seen several posts in the past from people asking if they can skip Sky the Third, and in response, I never stop them from doing it, but I always reiterate that they're doing a disservice to themselves if they decide to leave it behind. Though the gameplay is different and wouldn't be my personal choice, I feel that the other aspects aspects of the game more than make up for it, especially on the story front. When a person says that Trails in the Sky the Third is not important to the overall story of Trails, I firmly imprint my right hand on my forehead several times. First of all, Kevin is a brilliant protagonist, one that has sadly been underutilized since this point. I love the relationship between him and Rias, while also delving in further to his own backstory. But in addition to having a standalone narrative focused around Kevin and the mysterious Septian Church, Sky the Third also acts as an epilogue to the events of Sky, while also precursoring events yet to occur in the future Crossbell and Erebonian arcs, and it does this through the novel door mechanic. These doors, for me, are the best part about the game. They add so much more to not only this game but the future of the series too, and some of them are absolutely gut-wrenching to go through. The doors are there to not only expand on the lore but also round out certain character arcs, and for the most part it does it very well. Funnily enough, Sky the Third takes on a foundation that is quite similar to a game that is soon to release in the West, that being Trails into Reverie. If you've played both of them, you'll notice the similarity and that they serve a similar purpose, that being to act as a bridge between different arcs. While Sky the Third may not be my favourite in the series, its distinct purpose and additions to the lore make it a must-play for fans of Trails. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe for more JRPG content, and consider joining my Patreon if you're interested. Peace.